figuring out, I keep hitting to open my share tray and nothing's coming up. So
it's not letting you. Okay. Well, the good news is I have it, right? So let me see. I'm gonna unmute myself, mute myself and stuff. I'll download your slides and see if I can share. And in the meantime, do you want to maybe introduce yourself while I'm working on that?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Sky David. I'm the staff attorney at the Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and I believe that Monica should be on as well. Monica is going to go through a couple federal issues that we're looking at. I do direct legal services for Title IX cases, and I do our state policy work and also provide technical assistance to our rape crisis centers across the state. I am going to be focusing on our state level work that we are doing this biennium. But like I said, Monica will talk about some of the federal work we're doing as well. And Monica is very involved in that. And I can't see if Monica is on or not. But if she has anything to add, go ahead.
Okay. So Sky, your slides are in a PDF that I have, so that might be the best I can share. So let's see what we get here. So, and did you see where it says open share tray? It's just not letting you do that.
Right. When I click that, it's just black.
Very strange. Okay. Teams is always something. Let's see here. All right. Okay. So I'm going to all right, hold tight, everyone. We're coming. 1 sec. Let's see if this will work here.
I will say during this time while we're working this out, if y'all have any specific questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. If there's something you're looking for in this presentation, just let me know.
Are you seeing my screen or no?
Yes, sort of, yes.
Do you see your slides?
Yes.
Okay, well, we will do that. Sound good? And you just tell me when to scroll because it's a PDF.
Yeah, the first few slides are just about NC CASA, so they'll go by pretty fast. Like I said, Monica, our executive director, should be on the call for a bit as well. And if you haven't interacted with NC CASA before, we are happy to engage with you. Our second slide just kind of goes into who we are at NC CASA. A statewide alliance working to end sexual violence through education, advocacy, and legislation. Our framework is a social justice framework. That's how we operate at NC CASA. We believe that all survivors are served when we operate within that framework. Juliet, if you could go to the fourth slide, sorry. So these are some of the things we do at NC CASA. We do have statewide trainings related to sexual violence. We actually have a YouTube channel that you can view all of our trainings on. So you can go to the NC CASA YouTube and just kind of look through it. If there's something that you have an interest in, human trafficking, we've had a really great series on that. During the pandemic, we have really kind of expanded what offerings we have on our YouTube page. We also support rape crisis programs. We do resource sharing, technical assistance. If you have any specific questions, feel free to call us. We do policy change both at the local, state, and national level. We have an anti-human trafficking section. We do prevention and education. And then we have a joint coalition with the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, where we work with campuses and universities in our campus consortium project. Can we go to the next one? So these are just some acknowledgements that we like to highlight at NC CASA, and we can move on to our next slide. So the goals of this training, it's just to simply inform you and engage you in some of the legislative work we're working on here in North Carolina and the federal work as well. If you have any questions after this about how to become involved, or you want to participate in a specific agenda item, please contact me, and at the end I'll have my email as well. I will pause here and see if Monica is on. I don't see her. Okay. I'll keep going, and then once Monica hops on, I will allow her to kind of jump in with the federal work. I just talked to her a little bit ago, so I know that she should be on for at least a little bit. But I'll just start with kind of where we are at the state level. And where we are is that the General Assembly started their legislative biennium in January. They came back into session, and in the long session, which is your odd numbered years, so 2021 is a long session, that is when they create the state budget. And that's really the purpose for the legislative session, is crafting a state budget for a 2-year biennium. And all of the policy work is supposed to be introduced in that long session. So right now we're still in the bill filing period, where legislators can submit bill drafts, ideas that they want to work on, and bill drafting writes those into statutory form, and then they file their bills. It is March, and I will note that crossover is May 13th, which is the day that a bill has to pass either the House or the Senate to remain viable for the legislative session. And that session is 2021 and 2022. So it has to pass one chamber to be viable for that session, unless it has like money attached to it or is about redistricting. But for policy bills, they have to pass one of the chambers by that date. So since we're still in bill drafting time right now, some bills have been filed, and they've been filed since the first day of session, but there will still be many more bills filed from now until the bill filing deadline, which in the Senate is here in a couple weeks, and the House has extended their filing deadline by 2 weeks. So it won't be until May, which may also shift the crossover date as well. But you'll see a flurry of bills come in from now until then. So that's where we are. This week, the governor introduced his budget proposal, and the General Assembly looked at that. There was a full appropriations hearing with leaders from both the House and the Senate yesterday morning, where they went through Governor Cooper's budget proposal. And so where we are in the state budget is that the governor proposes his budget recommendations, and the Senate goes first this year, which means they draft their budget and they propose their budget recommendations, and then the House, they draft their budget. And after all three of these folks had gone, then the House and the Senate leaders They have what's called big chairs. Those are the budget writers. They get together behind closed doors and really go through the things that are different in their budgets and decide what's going to go in the final budget. That comes out as a conference report, which just means that there are no amendments to it. It's an up or down vote in both chambers. And at that point, we will have a state budget. And of course, the fiscal year starts July 1. So that's kind of the process for the budget. You might note that in last biennium, we did not have an agreed upon state budget that Governor Cooper signed. Instead, we had our steady line of line items that are funded every year. The General Assembly passed a bill in 2016, I believe, that said if there is no budget July 1st, we'll automatically revert back to the prior year's budget. So that happened, and then there were some mini budget bills, smaller projects that they agreed on that were passed separately, and the governor signed into law. So that's where we are as far as policy and also the budget goes. Can you go on to the next slide? Like I said, these are the important dates. The House's bill filing deadline changed since I wrote this yesterday. So it's 2 weeks from then, which will be right before that May 13th crossover deadline. Next slide. So as far as our work, NC CASA's work at the state legislature, I kind of divide that into the budget work and then the straight policy work. And I will go through each of these in detail. Our budget appropriations work, we have a priority of funding the rape crisis centers. That will remain a priority. We haven't had a funding increase since 2009. That's when we were decreased. That is going to remain a priority for us. And we also have an appropriations priority to support the Attorney General's office's ask for the funding to test the remaining sexual assault evidence collection kits. As far as our policy work goes, these are our different priorities. There's an abusive litigation bill that we're working on, child marriage, updating our criminal statutes, updating the parental termination statutes to comply with federal guidelines, and an informed consent bill. Again, I'll get into what those are. Like I said, our funding has not increased for rape crisis centers in over 10 years. Actually, we got a decrease when the recession hit. We were at $4 million, and right now we're at 2.895. And we just think in order to meet our increased demand for services, we need to have more funding for our centers. I will note here that Governor Cooper did include in his budget proposal a $2 million non-recurring funding mechanism for rape crisis centers and domestic violence service providers. So probably $1 million to each of the two to help us with this funding deficit. The other budget appropriation piece that we have been working on is, of course, for testing the rape kit backlog. You're probably aware of this, but due to the rising costs of testing kits, the backlog is not going to be cleared unless there's an additional allocation of funding. The request is for $9 million in non-recurring funds, and that accounts for that $500 increase in the kit testing price. I'll note that the General Assembly did allocate in last biennium $6 million, and at the time we thought that that would completely pay for testing all of the backlogged kits, but because of this cost increase, it will not, and there is an additional $9 million needed. The governor's proposed budget did include $10 million to test those kits and then to hire a couple extra folks. So moving on to our policy work. So these are our non-budget related items, simply changing statutes. Move on. For our first policy issue, it's a bill called Restricting Abusive Litigation. We are still in the drafting process of this bill. We have been through many versions of a draft, so we do expect to have a bill that will be filed soon. We started the session with the goal of having anti-SLAPP legislation on the books, which just gives folks an easy way to dismiss frivolous claims, and is really important for sexual assault survivors, let's say in a defamation lawsuit where maybe their perpetrator files an action, a defamation lawsuit against them just for retaliation or something like that. It's kind of an easier method for courts to go ahead and get rid of that claim. We have been working with Representative Brian Turner, and what actually happened was that he found out about an abusive litigation statute in Washington State. He heard it on NPR and called me, and we looked at the Washington State statute and we thought this actually could create sort of an anti-SLAPP here in North Carolina, but it would be more tailored to domestic violence and sexual assault survivors. It would allow a judge to order a litigant to stop filing lawsuits and actually prevent them from filing future lawsuits if the party is doing so to harass, intimidate, maintain contact with, or retaliate against the opposing party. It has a preponderance of the evidence standard. Ultimately, it would be up to the judge who's looking at the case, and the parties have to have either a personal relationship or one party has committed an act of domestic or sexual violence. So this would be a pretty big deal, but it is definitely one of our priorities this session, and I'm happy to answer questions about that if you have any. Yeah, we can move on if you'd like.
I'm sorry, is now a good time for a question?
Sure.
I was wondering for the parties, the standards for the litigation to fall under the anti-SLAPP, how is that determined by the court? So like either the personal relationship, the domestic violence, or the rape or sexual offense, how does the court know about that? Or like what's the standard?
Yeah, so I would say a plus and also a minus to this is that you would have to have had some prior interaction with the courthouse. And so it would be a personal relationship as defined in 50B, which, you know, maybe will be changing very soon. But an act of domestic violence, and we define that as well. And the bill also defines rape or other sexual offenses from Chapter 14 and Article 7B.
Thank you. And so would the person who is the defendant in a litigation like this have to have had like a previous, civil case or like police report on file to show the court? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, that is one way that it is not the strongest piece of legislation that you may see, but it is what we could get through the General Assembly.
Yeah. Thank you so much for explaining that.
Yeah, sure. Our second issue, if no one has any further questions, and feel free just to unmute yourself and ask a question. I am happy to engage that way. Our second issue is child marriage. This has gotten a lot of media attention this year. We have been working with a coalition of folks, so NC CASA, NCCADV, Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina, NC Child. I'm trying to think. There's quite a big group of folks who are working on this, and the national group that's working on this has hired a separate lobbyist. So we're kind of just supporting this measure and talking to legislators. We are the lowest aged state, tied with Alaska, where folks as young as 14 can be married in North Carolina. In the case of pregnancy, there are companion bills in the House and the Senate to raise that up to 18 without exceptions. Right now, there are some concerns from the Senate side that they would like to have a pregnancy exception for that. And the stance of the group that we're working with is that we would not like an exception, because that would be a way to essentially be okay with statutory rape in order to ensure that the marriage could be validated. So that's what we're looking at right now. And there are a ton of people working on this. And I think a lot of folks don't actually know that this is a problem, but the International Center for Research on Women did a 19-year study across North Carolina. They reached out to all the county clerks of court and asked them to participate in this study, and 50 of the 100 did. And they found in those 50 cases, or 50 counties, that there have been over 4,000 minors married in North Carolina, and 93% of those cases have been between a minor and an adult. So it's not your Romeo Juliet type of situation that I think folks probably think of originally. So that's one of our priorities as well. If you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer those at this time.
Sky, this is Juliet. I do have a question. Thank you for talking about this. So is there, I mean, obviously it makes no sense since age of consent is 16. So if you have someone pregnant under that age, there's been some type of statutory rape or rape involved. My question is there any, even with this age of 14, is there any legislation that protects, like, based on some kind of age difference? I know you said that there's adults, but could it be like, what if there's like a 50-year-old person and a 14-year-old child? They still allow?
Yeah, yes, it is still allowed. I should say that for 15 and 16, there does have to be parental consent. But in cases where the parents may not care what their child is doing, that they can just sign over their child to somebody else. So in those cases, that would otherwise be statutory rape in North Carolina law. We are allowing that. And I think the biggest age difference that they had found was a 15-year-old and a 58-year-old. And generally, most of the time, it is an older man and a minor female. Another policy issue we're looking at is updating our criminal statutes. So we would like to remove vaginal from the rape statutes, where they all say vaginal intercourse, and also remove forcible from our sexual offenses. So this would just really modernize our rape statutes in North Carolina. It is a heavy lift, I should say. I spoke to the Senate Judiciary chairs about this a few weeks ago and really got a lot of pushback from them. But over on the House side, there is a Republican legislator who is working on this with us. So on the House side, we're working with Representative Dahl and Representative Moffitt, but I do see some challenges over on the Senate side, where I'll just be frank, I told the judiciary chairs, and one of them said to me, if you want to remove gendered language from everything, then we'll remove all gender from the rape statute. So I think that now we're talking about it in updating or modernizing language instead of using the word gender. The next issue I'm going to talk about is kind of specific. We want to update our parental termination statutes to comply with federal guidelines. This is for grant funding, and we are denied every year. The Governor's Crime Commission is denied because we are not in compliance with the federal requirements in order to receive this grant funding. And it just changes the language to terminate parental rights from convicted of to found by clear and convincing evidence to have committed. So instead of a conviction, it's just to have committed, and then the rights are terminated. This is really just sort of a technical fix, we think, so that we can be eligible for that funding and get that out to folks across the state. Informed consent is our last large issue, and this bill would ensure that physicians and providers get written and oral informed consent from a patient before they conduct pelvic, rectal, and prostate exam. And that is if a patient is under general anesthesia or unconscious. We have been seeing some cases across North Carolina where someone goes down for a surgery, and especially in training hospitals, the medical students are then performing exams without their consent, but then the patients have signed a general consent waiver. And so if they find out that they had been subjected to these exams without their consent, they actually had signed the consent waiver. So this would just require that specific consent for these types of exams. And we have been working with the Hospital Association, and also the OB Society had some concerns about the original language. So we are in draft form here as well. We have been working with the UNC Law students and Professor Posner at UNC Law, who conducts the domestic violence and sexual violence clinic over there. During COVID, they have not been doing direct services, so they have been taking on more policy work, and it's been really fun working with students on this. And we have a pretty good lineup in the House for folks who are working on this with us. We have 1 Democrat and 3 Republicans, so I do feel good about that. But again, we are in draft form of that bill as well. So those are kind of our bigger issues. Since I don't believe Monica is on, I will just cover the federal issues, both VOCA and VAWA, the Victims of Crime Act and the Violence Against Women authorization are both things that we are working on. And we would ask folks to look into the VOCA fix, which is the fix to ensure that we can get VOCA funding out to our rape crisis centers. Our VOCA funding has decreased, it's I think 76% in the last 2 years. And so there is a piece of legislation that would fix that funding issue and get funding out to the states for victims of crime. And the VAWA authorization is important as always and has been introduced in the Senate. For more information on that, I would recommend reaching out to Monica. But at this time, I was very quick. I am happy to answer questions, or if you have ideas or concerns, things that you want to see changed, I'm happy to have that conversation as well. So we can just go back. You can take my screen sharing off if you'd like, and we can just have a conversation.
Great. Thank you, Sky. And if you all, some of you might feel more comfortable typing it in the chat. Others would like to unmute. That's fine. Just be mindful if we have multiple people unmute, we'll have to figure that out. But please take opportunity to ask Sky questions. And thank you for that, Sky. It was super informative.
I see the question about Caitlin's courage. Is that what you're asking about, Candace? Yes. I don't have any personal information on Caitlin's courage. That was something that was passed in the first COVID relief package, where it does GPS tracking, and it's a pilot program. If folks do have some advice on that, please chip in here. I don't. I could probably connect you to someone.
Could you explain what Caitlin's Law is for folks?
So I don't know if the folks that are implementing this in their county want to talk about it a little bit more, but just I only have a small amount of information about this. So I don't want to speak on something I don't know more about, but it is a domestic violence centered GPS tracking program.
Yes, ma'am. This is Sergeant Nix. I'm with Greensboro Police Department in Guilford County. We've had Caitlin's Courage up and running for the last couple of months. The program's designed to basically hold domestic violence offenders accountable and place them on a monitoring. The way the system works is it's a proximity alert. So having victim engagement is essential to the program being successful, because basically what it does is it allows the offender or the tracking company to be notified if the offender gets within a certain proximity to the victim. It also sets up proximity alerts around the victim's locations, whether that be her residence, her place of employment, daycares, parents' houses, that kind of stuff, so that it also alerts the tracking system if that offender should breach that perimeter. It alerts 3 times depending on the distance. The first time it would alert the tracking company, then reaches out to the victim, notifies her of his proximity. They also send a warning page to the offender telling him to back off, that he's breaching that perimeter. If they continue to go closer to the proximity, then if they get within 300 yards, 911 is immediately contacted and law enforcement is dispatched. What we like to try to recommend here in Guilford County is that the victim get a DVPO. That way, when we have a violation, we've got a clear-cut case of a criminal offense that we can take charges out on. We don't necessarily just limit it to the DVPO. If we can show any kind of indications of stalkish behavior or any kind of domestic criminal trespass, we attempt to take those charges out as well. It gives a little bit more punch so that it's not just a pretrial release violation, but it's an actual criminal violation when it comes to the domestic violence part of that. So we've had some ups and downs with the program so far. Victim engagement is the biggest issue. I think there were some challenges at the beginning of the stages where the judges were not really understanding and were just kind of issuing the monitor to any DV offense, where we at the Family Justice Center here in Guilford County, we're actually trying to kind of limit it to the more high risk cases. But like I said, I can discuss this with anybody who would be willing to talk to us about the pros and cons that we've seen with the program. I will say that Tar Heel Monitoring, who does the monitoring for the program, is outstanding and very easy to work with. They can provide locations, they can provide reports that you might need for probable cause when it comes to any kind of violations. So, so far we've been, the pros have very well outweighed the cons when it came to Caitlin's Courage.
Thank you. That was really helpful. I do see some other questions, and they're generally about the gendered language. And so I am happy to talk more about that. So currently our rape statutes do include vaginal in order for it to be considered intercourse, they all say vaginal intercourse. That is the way that our statutes are drafted. I should also note that even if the alleged intercourse was not vaginal, it is the same felony class. So for classification purposes, the felony was the same. Let's say it was an anal rape or two men, something like that, it would still be the same felony class. But telling one class of victims that they were raped and one class that they weren't is something we would like to change. So taking that out would just allow rape to be what it is, rape. So that is our priority for that specific change. The other change, which would be taking forcible out, it would just change throughout 14-27, intercourse to, and then after intercourse or a sexual act, instead of taking out instead of having forcible sex offense and requiring force, because the sex offenses are in of themselves forcible, instead of requiring that use of force.
Sky, this is Juliet. I just wanted to mention another area where the language around, even though it's the same class felony, this is something that still stays. As I remember years ago with the Duke lacrosse case, one of the experiences the survivor had was that she was anally penetrated by a bottle. And because that was termed as a sexual offense, there was, and there was like a headline that said, rape charges not found or whatever. They sort of, the media headline made it sound as if there was not a rape occurring, but it was really this legal language. And that really created a lot of misinformation about the situation and victim blaming that continues on to today. I mean, just last week, someone was asking me or mentioned that case, and we were talking all about, again, how well it really was sexual offense and it's the same class felony, but it's not the same language. So in addition to being equitable in how we label people's experiences, I think it also has very significant long-term impacts on language and victim blaming and all those things.
Any other questions, thoughts, concerns? I think someone asked about how they can get involved with the gendered language, support the change. I would recommend reaching out to both your House members and your senators. If you want to shoot me an email, I'll put my email in the chat here. I can tell you who that is and kind of give you some language for that, if that's something you're interested in. You can send me an email. We also, NC CASA, we send out periodic updates on both state and federal policy issues to a policy specific group. You don't have to get all of the NC CASA emails to get the policy emails. And if you'd like to be added to that group, you can just send me an email as well. And I send out some policy updates as it relates to either changes that are happening that I want you to be aware of, and or where we'd like you to take some action. Someone asked, do I know what the stage the child marriage issue is at? Yes. So the bill would like to move, the bill sponsors would like it to move first in the House and then go to the Senate. Like I said, that has to happen by May. And that bill was filed fairly early in the session, within a week or two, in both the House and the Senate. It's the same language in both chambers. There has been an issue where like I said earlier, I think the Senate has some concerns. They would like that exemption for pregnancy. So there needs to be a little more education on that side. However, we would like to go ahead and move that bill through the House and then deal with the Senate issues as they arise. So right now, I think they're looking at moving that through the Families, Children, and Aging Committee in the next week or two. Many of the bill sponsors are on that committee, so I don't see that as an issue. It moves through that committee, and right now it doesn't have any other referrals. It'll go to the Rules Committee and then be on the floor. So it should be a fairly simplistic process on the House side. But I do expect to see that bill move either this week or the week after spring break, which is the week of April 5th. Both the House and the Senate will be taking that week off. Yeah, thank you for the questions.
Anybody have other questions for Sky or questions about NC CASA? Well, we are super grateful, Sky, for everything that you shared. I think people were really interested in your topic, and you explained very, tricky language and legal jargon very well and easy for us to understand. So we really appreciate that, at least for me. I'm speaking for myself. And I will send out, Sky said, oh, good. There's another question, so I'll just wrap up what I was saying. But Sky did share the slides with me, so I will make sure to email you all the slides and a quick evaluation. And Sky, if you want to take.
Yeah, sure. The question is about hospital surveys and sexual assault services. So we did have on our legislative agenda that we wanted an audit of all of the hospitals to see how many certified SANE nurses they had and also what services they were providing. Kate Martin of Carolina Public Press did a 2-part series on that in North Carolina. And of the folks that responded, she found that there were only about 140 SANEs, certified SANEs in North Carolina that were operating. Of course, they were centered mostly around our urban areas, which posed some concerns. Her story got picked up by various news organizations. And once it hit kind of the government news service, it's called The Insider, that pretty much all the legislators read and lobbyists, etc. Once it hit that, and the Hospital Association kind of felt the pressure from that, and legislators started reaching out about it, the Hospital Association magically was ready to come to the table with us. So we have been working in collaboration with the Hospital Association for the last month and a half or 2 months at this point. We actually have a meeting with them this afternoon where we will be talking about having a SANE task force that's going to include certified SANEs, folks from the Hospital Association, I think one of their attorneys, and then they would like us to get some survivors who have had experiences at hospitals that maybe were not good. So if you do have a survivor who you feel may be interested in serving on this task force, so we could recommend best practices to North Carolina hospitals and potentially turn that into legislation, please do reach out to me. Again, my email is sky@nccasa, Sky with an E at NCCASA. And right now we are in the stage of collaborative work, but I have made it very clear to the Hospital Association that if they are not collaborative, that we will move forward with legislation. So that's something I would foresee us putting in the budget or something like that. I should also note, someone's asking a SANE specific question, and I believe that Lauren Schwartz is on this call. So I will allow Lauren to answer that question because she is an expert, and she's involved with our state association, our section of the International Association of Forensic Nurses.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Lauren. I think there is, I do want to make the point that there is a difference between certified SANEs and SANEs that have been trained. Certification is not required to practice as a SANE nurse or to perform a SANE exam or collect a rape kit. Certification is definitely a goal for a lot of nurses. It is, shows that you have achieved a higher standard of practice and are committed to that continuing education. But certification is not required. And I think one of the things that a lot of SANE program coordinators and SANEs across the state are just concerned about is the fact that we don't have a good picture or a clear understanding of how many trained SANE nurses we have. The International Association of Forensic Nurses does keep track of the number of certified SANEs, and I believe last time I checked, there were around maybe 48 that were in North Carolina. But there is a difference. And we also recommend that nurses practice for a while as a SANE before attempting to obtain that board certification. Hopefully that answers the question.
That was really helpful, Lauren. Thank you. Sky, are you still on there? Well, while we're figuring that out, other questions? Oh, it looks like Sky.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. I was trying to myself.
No problem. Other questions? Okay, well, if folks want to get on your policy email, then they can email you, right? And I'll put that in the follow-up email that I'll send you all. And thank you again, Sky, for all of this, and hope Monique is all right. Tell her we said hi. And thank you all for being here. I'll send you an email in just a minute, everyone. It looks like Kylie's mentioning there's a grant that UNC has for certification if folks.
Yes.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.